In one of the most stacked years in recent memory, the Oklahoma City Thunder have set themselves apart from the majority of the Western Conference, sitting at the 2 seed despite the youth movement that they've had over the years and the continued draft picks they have in the future. The real question comes for this team: do they have what it takes to get it done when it comes to the playoffs?
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry! With 0.6 of a second remaining.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Game Time. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to jump right into things here today. Now, before we get into anything, if you guys do enjoy, make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe for more. Without further ado, today, obviously, we are talking about none other than the Oklahoma City Thunder. If that wasn't apparent by the thumbnail and title, I don't know what would have been, but this team has been very, very good so far this season. Not only do they sit tied for the first seed currently in the Western Conference, but just overall, when you watch this team on the court, they have elevated what they were doing last year and the year prior to a whole nother level to take themselves into real consideration when it comes to playoff time. They are a team that a lot of teams don't want to face in the first round, and though they have inexperience in that regard, a lot of people are still picking this team to go fairly far in the playoffs regardless. Now, they could be matched up against some juggernauts who have won championships over the past couple years, that being the Golden State Warriors, the Los Angeles Lakers, or even teams that have gone to the Western Conference or finals over the last year. Or not over the last year, but over the last couple years in Dallas and Phoenix. So there is a lot of competition still sitting at the bottom of the Western Conference that could match up against OKC in the early rounds, but most people still project OKC to at least make it to the second round, and I think that's high praise for what this team has been able to put together this season. Now, like I said, they sit at 40-17, currently second in the Western Conference. They are a very, very good offensive team, and we'll get to their defense in a minute. But obviously, I think when you think of the Oklahoma City Thunder, you think of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and you think of the MVP level season that he's having, averaging over 31 points per game, over 6 assists per game, 5 rebounds, 2 steals, and nearly a block per game as well, whilst shooting 55% from the field and 38% from 3. And he has played as well as anyone in the entirety of the NBA. Obviously, if you guys have seen my Luka video, which I'll link down below, I still think that right now it's either Jokic or Luka for the MVP conversation, but Shai right there would probably be tied for third with either, Giannis, or say we still had Embiid in the race. I think Embiid would kind of stand above the rest, but Shai has had as good of a season as anybody at this point, and it should be in MVP conversations, and there's a reason that a lot of people are starting to pick him for MVP and putting him as the favorite in that regard, just because he not only is such a good offensive player, but he's there defensively too. He is such a good offensive player that sometimes it kind of cloud your mind on like, oh wait, this guy is also one of the premier defenders at his position in the league, and he's been doing that for OKC this season. So like I said, they are third in points per game this season, and they are 13th in in opponent points per game this season, which is very good because obviously you want to score more than the other guy. That's kind of the objective of sports. But then when you look at their defensive rating as well, they sit at 4th for their defensive rating and 3rd overall for their offensive rating. So they are great on both sides of the ball. When you think about a team that you want to see potentially go win an NBA championship, you have to be top 10 essentially in both of those categories. There are very few teams throughout history that have not been top 10 in both of those categories, and the Thunder are top 5 in both those categories, which bodes well for what we could potentially see come playoff time. I think a big thing from this team is obviously you have guys that can score. Shai being the number one, Jalen Williams has looked to take another step this season. I can't remember whose podcast I was listening to where they were talking about just his progression from really his first game until now, and how it's almost been like 3 seasons of basketball, because every single month you've literally seen just progression after progression when it comes in the scoring department, efficiency, whatever it is. He has shown that level of linear progression on par with really similar to what Victor Wembanyama is doing this year with the Spurs, where you can kind of see how the game is just coming to him a lot easier every single night. And so that's super awesome to see. Obviously, he was a top rookie last year, and he has been a very good player for this team so far this season, averaging 19 points, second on the team in scoring, as well as shooting 45% from 3, which I think is huge, because when you have a guy that I don't think most people typically think of Jalen Williams as like a 3-point type of shooter, and I do think that's where some stuff on this team could be potentially become an issue come playoff time is some of the spacing, because though they've had historically great averages across pretty much the board for all their players, that includes like a guy like Aaron Wiggins, who only shoots 1.6 a game, but is shooting 51%. You have, why can I not find him? You have Lou Dort, who is shooting over 40%, and he's typically been looked at as a guy that you live with him shooting. So there are a lot of kind of historical averages in regards to shooting on this team this year, and I think teams are going to force them to win with that and prove that they are that good of a shooting team come playoff time. Now we'll see if that kind of compounds there, but with Jalen Williams being the level of shooter and scorer as a second option to Shai this season, it has been huge for this team. And probably the biggest X factor for this team so far has been the rookie for them, Chet Holmgren. Obviously, he sat out the entirety of his first season in the NBA, didn't play a game until this season, and man, has he been good. If Wemby wasn't a player, then I think, Chet would run away with the Rookie of the Year award by miles. The thing is Wemby has just had such a historical season. Chet was actually my prediction preseason for a Rookie of the Year season, and he's had just as good, if not a better season than what I thought he could have had, which is, a testament to how good Wemby's been for him to really be the runaway Rookie of the Year at this point. And just a testament to how good Chet's been for the fact that, somebody that was picking him to be better than Wemby for his rookie season, and he's still outdone my expectations, averaging 17 points this season, 7 rebounds, and also getting 2.6 blocks per game, also at nearly a steal a game. He has been a defensive monster. His help side defense is insane. Both him and Wemby, I think, are comparable in that aspect, and I think they will get comparisons for a long time throughout their careers. Obviously, being just two very slender bigs that might be 4 or 5 tweeners as they go out throughout their careers, but can stretch the floor, can handle the ball. It's all there. The whole package for the game is there. He's shooting 40% from 3 as well as a big man, which is absurd considering he takes more attempts than Jalen Williams or Shai, who are both more guard/forwards. Obviously, Shai being a guard, Jalen Williams being more of a guard/forward, depending on the night, I guess. And then, I think this team has really been able to hold its hat on the defensive side of the ball due to how good Chet's been. Now, one thing with this team is the rebounding, and they did bring in Bismack Biyombo, who's played one game for them so far, got a block and a steal, or not a block and a steal, a block and a rebound in his 8 minutes that he's played. So we'll see how that progresses for the rest of the season. They did just need another big body in there, and I'm in agreement with a lot of people. They think that it was a good pickup, and I would agree. So they also went and picked up Gordon Hayward at the trade deadline, and so we'll see how that veteran leadership kind of plugs into this team, because really Bismack Biyombo and Gordon Hayward are the only veterans on this team, and that's where it becomes questionable come playoff time. Like, will this team be able to get it done? Well, yes, you've had Shai, I think, in 2 playoff series when Chris Paul was there in OKC, and then his rookie season with the Clippers. And then Lou Dort also was on that playoff team with this Oklahoma City Thunder team. But other than that, this is a completely different roster from top to bottom on players that, were there prior, right? This is just completely different from where you were at when you made the playoffs with Chris Paul. You couldn't name any of these guys back then because they were barely draft prospects, right? Unless you were that much of a draft phenom. As it goes for like the rest of the roster, I think Cason Wallace has stepped in and been a very good guard off the bench. He's averaging about 7 points off the bench with 1.4 assists. So hopefully, he could develop into a little bit more of a playmaker, but he's a very good defensive guard and can score as well. Josh Giddey has been fine for Josh Giddey standards. He's averaging about 11, 4, and 6. So normal Josh Giddey year. He hasn't really taken another step. Though the interesting thing is him and Chet are still only 21. Cason Wallace is 20. Jalen Williams is 22. This is just one of the youngest teams in the league, and it's just crazy to think about how good they've been this season. Another guy I do want to highlight quickly would be, yes, Aaron Wiggins and Kenrich Williams have been nice for them, but Isaiah Joe, he's been able to step in and be a extremely lethal 3-point shooter at 42%. He's averaging 8 points per game. He's been great off the bench. He's been getting some kind of starting minutes coming out of halftime for them occasionally. And I think I want to say the lineup with him on the floor is actually like one of the best lineups in the league when he comes in with the starters. So yeah, I think he's been fantastic for them, and I wanted to give him his flowers there. But yeah, obviously the ship is going to run through Shai, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren, and those are the three you're going to be looking at come playoff time to not only take the fantastic years that all three of them have had so far this season and elevate that even further. Now, again, I think Lu Dort will potentially be kind of the guy that teams make win the series, and it's very possible that he could do exactly what a Terrence Mann did back for the Clippers when they played against the Utah Jazz, where the Jazz were like, look, we'll live with losing to Terrence Mann, and they did. But there are a lot of times where you play in series and it's like, oh, we're going to live with losing to that guy, and it ends up working out in your favor. So we'll just see how Lu Dort responds to that as it goes for seeding and how I think that that's all going to play out. I do think that this team is pretty locked to at least be a top 3 seed. They play well against the top teams. They are currently on a win streak, and so it doesn't look like they should be falling off. Recently they've beaten the Clippers, who are a top 4 team as well. So it does help them in that category to stay where they are. Now, matchup-wise, there are some favorable stuff for OKC. Obviously, I think you want to play a team that doesn't have as much size. I don't think you want to see a team, obviously you wouldn't see them, but I don't think you want to see a team like Minnesota or Denver in the first round because, yes, Chet's a great kind of help defender and stuff like that, but I don't really love the matchup of Chet on like a Jokic or even like trying to rebound against Rudy Gobert would be something interesting to see. Rudy Gobert and Cat obviously would kind of clog up the paint there against the entirety of the Oklahoma City Thunder roster. Some teams that I do think could be favorable to matchups would be like a New Orleans Pelicans if they start to fall down the standings a little bit, which everything is super close. Just the other day, I think they were the 8 seed, now they're the 5 seed. So we'll see how everything kind of trickles down to the end. I do think Phoenix could be an interesting matchup, as Phoenix doesn't really have a lot of depth, though they have the experience and they've been there, and I do think they have the top end talent. I wouldn't necessarily count OKC out in a playoff series versus them. Sacramento is another team that I don't really love the matchup for OKC. I think Sabonis, they just don't have an answer for a guy like Sabonis when you're looking at that type of series. And then even Dallas, I think they've added a lot of bigger bodies that would impede kind of some of what OKC's done so far this season, where it's like, okay, if you're not making your shots and everything tightens down, slows up in the playoffs, a lot of those guys haven't been there. I do think Dallas could be a threat there. And then obviously the Lakers are known for having size. But again, if they ended up matching up against like the Warriors, that would probably be a little bit more of a favorable matchup. So it's about 50-50 if I look at the playoff teams of, okay, I think this is a favorable matchup for OKC. Okay, this I think is a favorable matchup for the other team, which I think is very kind of spread across the board for the majority of playoff teams, especially in the West this year, just due to the parity in the league and how well pretty much we have a full 10 teams that people can realistically pick to make the finals, win the finals. I know on Numbers on the Board, P, he's been talking about how, well, maybe, the Warriors look really good. They've been on a run. Do they have a shot to actually go and win a championship? And though I would put a lot of money against them on somebody else, if I had to pick the field, I'd obviously pick the field. They are the 10 seed. But it's like, yeah, that core's been together forever. This core has the experience. They have 4 championships. There's a very real chance that one of these lower seeds ends up going deep in the playoffs. And that's scary for a young team like OKC or a young team like Minnesota, both teams with kind of limited playoff experience with the core that they have currently. I think Minnesota has a little bit more. They obviously were there last year. But I'm not discounting OKC in that regard because of one man, and that's Shai. And I think this is a big reason why, again, a lot of people are moving him up in the MVP standings. They're putting him at their top for the MVP, and there's a very, very real chance that, within 2 months, he's almost a nearly unanimous MVP if the Oklahoma City Thunder are able to capture the best record in the Western Conference and truly are able to not only continue the dominance they've shown in the regular season to this point, but even extend that. There's a very real chance that he captures the MVP this season. And that would be super awesome to see for a guy that, was kind of looked down on in the draft. I know I always think of him because he goes in one of those 2 picks before the Nuggets drafted Michael Porter Jr. And I want to say they drafted Jeremiah Robinson Earl. I don't know. I always forget the other guy that got drafted by the Clippers for the reason that, well, he's not Shai. And Shai has been great, obviously, goes to the playoffs his first year with the Clippers. His next 2 years is voted on to potentially be a most improved player when he gets to OKC. We've known that they've kind of been known for shutting him down a little bit early in the seasons to help their draft odds. But then you get to last year where he finishes top 5 in MVP. He makes All-NBA first team, really steps it up, goes from 24 to 31 points per game from the 2021-2022 season until last year. Makes his first All-Star team, finishes second in most improved player. And again, this year follows it up with yet another All-Star performance. He's had a career high in steals this season, a career high in blocks this season. He's not at a career high in points. He's just 0.2 under what he was doing last year. But then when you look at it from a percentage-wise, he's shooting the second best percentage he's ever shot from three. You have to go all the way back to his second season in the league to see this type of shooting from him. His third season in the league where he shot 41%, his only year ever over 40%. And then when you even just look at it from a field goal percentage side, he's shooting his best from the floor when he's getting the most attention on the opposite side. Like if you're playing against OKC, your best defender or one of your top two defenders on all possessions is against Shai, and he's still scoring at the highest level that he ever has, right? And so I think that's a testament to his ability to just be crafty with the ball, right? He is able to just get to his spots. I can't even, there's not even a lot of great players to compare, just how he kind of gets down to the lane, gets where he wants to, gets his little floater, turnaround. He shoots a lot more from inside the arc than a lot of other stars in today's game, which I think is interesting to see just how that different play style plays against some other teams. And, he still is very good playmaker. He gets rebounds as much as, he can for being out there as a guard, right? Like he is a taller guard, so that helps him in that regard, and he gets about 5 rebounds a game. But I do still look at that as the team as a whole, a little bit lacking in the rebound department when we get to playoff time. And then even when you look at turnovers, it is his third lowest of his career. So, pretty much since he was a sophomore, since he was in his first year with OKC, this is his best turnovers per game. So he's holding onto the ball. He's averaging a career high in assists. I mean, there's nothing you can look at what Shai has done this year and say anything other than praise for it. And I think that's just the way you have to look at it. As for the rest of the season and how we should see them kind of get towards playoffs and seeding and all that, obviously we talked about some matchups. They have one of the easier schedules going for the rest of the season. They have the 9th easiest schedule for the rest of the year, according to Tankathon, and that should bode well for this team. You could have played the Rockets a couple more times. You could have played the Spurs, the Hornets. So I do think that will help this team. Obviously, they've played well against good teams, and playing against good teams can kind of help prepare you for the playoffs, especially at this point in the year where, all these teams are fighting for seeding, and we'll see if there's any teams that kind of hunt matchups. I think it'll be difficult in the Western Conference to do so. I think that's more of a possibility in the Eastern Conference, but OKC will be able to hopefully strengthen their case for the number 1 seed and for home court advantage throughout the playoffs. Obviously, we know back when Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden were there when they were the baby Thunder back in the day, right? They obviously were known for having such a great home court advantage, the way that the fans poured into the arena. And I'd assume that, the Thunder fans are going to ride just as hard for this team come playoffs because, again, it's a young team with a lot of hype at the top of the standings, currently on a 5-game win streak. They've won over 70% of their games this year, and they still hold top picks come draft time as well. So even if stuff doesn't go the way you want it to come playoff time, which that's just me assuming that lack of experience will hold this team back from anything more than a conference finals appearance. I think that would be their ceiling, in my opinion, would be to make the conference finals. And I think already this year's been a win. I wasn't as high on the OKC jump coming into the season as a lot of other people were. I thought OKC would be a good team. I thought they could be a top 6 to 4 team, which they are technically a top 4 team. They're really a top 2, top 1 team right now in the Western Conference. So I wasn't as high and didn't think they'd have quite the jump that they've had to this point. I thought they would be more of a truly in the pack guaranteed playoff team, as comparatively to last year, where it was okay, they'll be in the playoffs next year. They're in the play-in, they'll be in the playoffs next year type thing. And they took the jump that some experts were predicting, and come, off season, they were like, look, OKC is going to be super fucking good next year. And that's exactly what they've been. And so I guess I have to admit, I was wrong on even how good this team could be, and that could apply to the playoffs as well. But if we do look past the playoffs, they do currently sit with the 9 and 11 pick, that from Houston and that from Utah, so that's good for them. They will be able to get more talent in. I want to say, currently they're projected to get Rob Dillingham from Kentucky and then Cal Filipowski from Duke. I do think Filipowski would be a very good ad for them. Obviously, he did just get injured from the court storming incident the other day, which obviously is very annoying as a Duke fan. But I do think he'd be a good ad kind of as a backup behind Chet. Doesn't necessarily provide the full center role next to Chet because, again, I think he's a little bit more of a 5/4 once he gets to the league. And I would love to see next year trying out getting a center and seeing how Chet looks at the 4, the same way I'd love to see that for Wemby. But I do think they've also both played well at the 5, that it's not something you have to rush to do. It would kind of keep them away from some injuries, which I think would be helpful. I think it's a big reason why Anthony Davis hasn't wanted to play the 5 a lot in his career, because you just get injured, you're banging more, especially at their thinner frames. And if rebounding becomes an issue come the playoff time, I would love to see that be an option that they pursue and kind of look at come the offseason. But yeah, I think this team looks very good. They look to have one of the better chances come playoffs. And as for future projections, we know that OKC has beyond too many picks. I even forgot to mention they have the Clippers pick this offseason. They have, I think, 4 first-round picks next year. They've got 3 in 2027, another 2 in 2029. They have nearly the entire 2029 second-round picks. Like, they have, 6 in the second round there. So, this team, if somebody's not working out on this team, you can easily move off them. You can easily send them to another team and bring in another young guy to try and build up. And you'll never really have to worry about not a lack of talent, I think, at the back end of this rotation, which I think will be huge, because you look at some of the other contending teams or teams that have star players on them, the bottom of their roster slowly thins out. You can look at the defending champions, the Nuggets, who are looked at to have, yes, a younger bench, but also a weaker bench than last year, right? You don't have Jeff Green, you don't have Bruce Brown, and you're more reliant on, a couple second-year players in Peyton Watson and Christian Braun, right? Or you can even look at the Warriors, whose roster thinned out a lot, especially once they ended up getting Kevin Durant. Speaking of Kevin Durant, the Suns rosters looked at to be very thin. So I think OKC will be able to have good depth going into the future. You will have to make a lot of decisions as it goes for paying guys, and I think that's where, some of the second apron rules and some of that stuff that hasn't quite fully come into effect, that was meant to help smaller markets keep their players, could come and actually hurt a team like OKC that will have so many young players that they'll have to pay. And so there will be a lot of big decisions that Sam Presti has to make over the next couple of years, which he's been such a great drafter and so good at getting draft picks. His biggest question mark, I think, throughout his career as a general manager has been making the right decision when it comes to paying players. Obviously, chooses to not go into the luxury tax and trades James Harden away. Harden goes on to win MVPs, and that OKC team never goes on to win a championship. So I think he'll have similar kind of stuff come up with, guys like Chet, Jalen Williams, Shai. They are locked up right now for the foreseeable future, but when you get to 4 or 5 years down the line, these questions will start to pop up, and I'm sure there will be essentially cap casualties, which isn't something you typically see in the NBA as it goes for young players. Typically, if a guy goes somewhere else, it's like, oh, well, we didn't want to pay him that much, whereas OKC's going to want to pay them. They're just not going to be able to, is the issue there. And so, again, something that you typically more see in the NFL, where it's like, oh, we'll cut this guy as a cap casualty, whereas here it's like, we literally can't pay him $40 million a year because we don't have the money to do so. And that's even in a more flexible cap league than a lot of other leagues. I think baseball is probably the most flexible of the major sports leagues, especially in America. But the NBA has been up there, and with the luxury tax, with the second apron and stuff like that, it is becoming a little bit more restrictive. And so we'll see how that bodes for this team as they get older. But as for this year, it has already been a year, or a win of a year in my books. Again, I think they outperformed most people's expectations coming into the season, and if they have any playoff success, that's just a cherry on top. Then we'll see how well Shai does trying to get that MVP if we see a push for it. He should have the games played requirement almost done by then. He's at 56 right now, so he just needs to play 9 of their next 25. He's sitting really easily in the conversation to win it, and it's going to come down to can he find some of those moments towards the end of the season that it's like, all right, that's the MVP this year, and can he capture it? So I think that's the biggest story for OKC is, will Shai be the MVP this year? Again, personally, I'd have to lean a little bit towards probably not, but I can't count him out. I can't count him out with the type of year that he's had. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe for more. And that is going to be it from me, Dom, here at Game Time. And I'll catch you all next time. Peace out, guys.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, dude. Oh my. That's disgusting.